He had never been told no, not once, not in 30 years of conquest, not by Babylon, whose gates had stood for centuries before he simply walked through them, not by Lydia, not by the Medes, whose empire had stood for generations before he crushed it in a single campaign. Every wall he had ever faced had crumbled. Every king who had ever defied him had eventually knelt. He was Cyrus the Great, builder of the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen, a man his own people called the father of their nation, a man whose armies were said to drink rivers dry on their march. He looked north at the steppe. He sent envoys. The Persian delegation arrived on horseback, loaded with gifts, gold, silk, the kind of things that were meant to signal the distance between civilization and the people it was approaching. They were brought before Tomyris. She sat while they read the proposal aloud. A marriage, a union of peoples. Cyrus the Great offering his hand to the queen of the Massagetae. The chiefs around her said nothing. The wind moved through the camp. Somewhere outside, horses shifted and stamped. She stood.
Tell your king, I rule my people. He rules his. That is enough. If he crosses the river, he will not find what he is looking for.
The envoys left. Cyrus read the message. He ordered his army north anyway. The envoys returned days later. They read Tomyris's answer aloud inside the Persian command tent. Around Cyrus stood the men who had followed him through 30 years of conquest, generals who had watched entire kingdoms disappear beneath his campaigns. No one spoke. Cyrus folded the message once, then again. He placed it on the table beside the maps. Build the bridges. That was all he said. No argument, no anger, just another campaign. Every other kingdom had eventually become part of his empire. There was no reason to believe this one would be different. He would not come back. Tomyris watched the Persian envoys disappear across the horizon. One of her chiefs stepped beside her. "Do you think he will listen?" She kept watching the dust left behind by the horses. "No." A long silence. "Then gather everyone." Drawn from history. To understand what he was riding into, you have to stand where Tomyris stood and look at what she saw. Not cities, no walls, no temples rising above the plain, just grassland stretching to every horizon, broken only by wind and the movement of herds and the distant shapes of riders who had been born in the saddle and would die in it. The Massagetae didn't need walls because they were never still long enough to require them. Children learned to ride before they could walk, not as a custom but as a necessity, because a person who couldn't move at speed across the steppe was a person who couldn't survive it, boys and girls both. Women rode beside men, hunted beside men, fought beside men when fighting was required, not as a philosophy or an ideal, as simple fact. Cyrus had looked at this people and seen something he could absorb. Tomyris had looked at Cyrus and seen something she could outlast. She understood her people the way a general understands a weapon, precisely without illusion. No fixed positions, no sieges, no cavalry engagements on terrain the enemy had chosen. Her warriors could strike from any direction and be gone before a response could form. The steppe itself was her fortress, and she had never needed another kind. She had ruled long enough to know the difference between a threat and an announcement. Cyrus crossing the Araxes River was an announcement. She began preparing her answer. Week after week, the Persian army moved north. Bridges rose across the Araxes. Supply wagons stretched beyond the horizon. Wherever they marched, the earth itself seemed to move beneath them. Yet every evening, when scouts returned, they brought the same report. No city, no fortress, no army waiting, only grass, endless grass, as though the land itself refused to become part of an empire. Her warriors wanted to attack. Some argued the Persians should be struck while they crossed the river. Tomyris refused. Not there. She would fight only where the steppe belonged to her. She had no intention of helping Cyrus choose the battlefield. Cyrus knew conventional battle was the wrong tool. He had built an empire on knowing which tool to use. The steppe offered nothing to besiege, nothing to assault, no choke point to exploit, and no fixed enemy to pin down. So he built his own trap. He moved a portion of his army across the river, made camp on the far bank, visible, deliberate, impossible to miss. Then he filled it. Lavish food, silk, gold. All the trappings of Persian wealth spread across a camp that looked, from a distance, like something left behind in a hasty retreat. And wine. Quantities of Persian wine, undiluted. The Massagetae had almost no experience with wine. Their drink was fermented mare's milk, mild, familiar, nothing like what Cyrus was leaving out. He knew this. He had built the entire trap around this single piece of knowledge. He pulled his soldiers back. Cyrus walked through the abandoned camp one last time. Every table had been prepared, every cup filled, every chest deliberately left open. One of his officers looked uncertain. Will they really take it? Cyrus looked across the empty steppe. Everyone takes the gift they believe they have earned. Then he rode away. The abandoned camp remained exactly where he wanted it, waiting. Days later, Spargapeses rode beside his mother, young, confident, too eager to prove himself. Tomyris noticed it. She smiled, then reminded him of the oldest lesson on the steppe: never chase a retreat that comes too easily. The bait was discovered by a Massagetae force commanded by Spargapeses, her son. They celebrated. Of course they did. An enemy camp full of riches, the Persians apparently in retreat. It looked like a gift, and warriors who have just driven off an army don't stop to question gifts. They ate, they drank. The wine did what wine does to people encountering it for the first time. By nightfall, they were unconscious. Cyrus came back with his full force. The slaughter was over before it properly began. Those who survived were taken prisoner. Spargapeses was among them. The crown prince, the queen's son, taken not in battle, but through deliberate intoxication. When he woke, he understood. Not just the defeat, the method of it, the dishonor of it. He asked his captors to remove his chains, just for a moment. They did. He killed himself with his own hands rather than face his mother as a symbol of how easily her people could be brought down when they stopped being themselves. The messenger rode hard. When he arrived at Tomyris's camp and spoke, she did not collapse, did not weep. What the ancient sources record instead is what she did next, the message she sent back to Cyrus and the voice it was written in.
You bloodthirsty man, do not be proud. You won with wine and tricks, not with iron and courage. Hear my vow. I swear by the sun above this steppe, I will give you your fill of blood.
Not a threat, a statement of what was going to happen. She began to move through the camp. The chiefs watched her. The warriors watched her. Something had shifted in the air. Not panic, not grief, but a quality of absolute intention that settled over the Massagetae like weather. She called every warrior she could reach. Old men who remembered older wars. Boys barely old enough, but old enough. Every person in her confederation who could hold a weapon and move under their own power. The Persian king wanted blood. She was going to give him the exact amount she had promised. They met on the open steppe, Cyrus's army of hardened Persian veterans against a Massagetae force that had made its own calculation, and found only one acceptable outcome. Before the arrows came, there was silence. Thousands of men, thousands of horses, and almost no sound except the wind moving across the grass. Then someone loosed the first arrow. They opened with arrows, both sides simultaneously. Herodotus writes that the sky darkened with volleys before the quivers emptied and the two armies closed the remaining distance on foot, with spears and knives and whatever was left. At first the Persian lines held. They always held at first. 30 years of discipline. Veterans who had stood in formation against every army the ancient world could produce and had never broken. The Massagetae wave hit the Persian front and the front absorbed it, and for a long moment it looked like the outcome that everyone outside the steppe would have predicted. But the Massagetae didn't retreat to regroup. They didn't recalculate. They pressed. The warriors behind the front pushed forward regardless of what was happening ahead of them. Not from ignorance, but from a decision already made before the battle began. They had come to finish something. They were going to finish it, or die on that ground. The Persian commanders pushed discipline harder. Hold the line. Hold. The line compressed. Soldiers who had never experienced pressure like this, pressure that didn't respond to formation, that didn't back away when formation held, began to feel something they had no training for: doubt. The gaps that opened in the Persian line were filled before they could be exploited, then opened again, then filled again more slowly. Soldiers who had been looking forward began glancing sideways. The great machine of the Persian army, built over 3 decades to be unstoppable, was discovering what happens when it meets something that simply refuses to accept the premise. The line fractured. Around Cyrus, his guard began collapsing, one by one. Orders disappeared beneath the noise. Standards fell. Dust swallowed everything. For the first time in 30 years, King, who had never lost, realized the battle no longer belonged to him. Then it broke. Somewhere in the dust and blood and chaos, in the screaming and the press of bodies and the collapse of the formation that had never before collapsed, Cyrus the Great died. Not heroically. Not in a single combat or a moment of legend. Just somewhere in the ruin of an afternoon he had expected to control. Dead on the grass of people he had come to conquer. They searched the field until sunset. Bodies covered the grass. Persian, Massagetae, horse, man. Eventually, someone called her name. Tomyris found his body. She ordered a wineskin to be filled with blood from the battlefield dead. Then she took the head of Cyrus the Great and put it in.
You wanted blood? Drink your fill.
They call it barbaric. They use words about her that reveal more about the people using them than about the woman they're describing. No one celebrated. There were too many dead for celebration. The wind moved through the grass exactly as it had before the battle. Only one thing had changed. Cyrus would never cross that river again. She had promised him blood. She was a woman who kept her promises. A cup for a cup. Wine for blood. Dishonor answered without mercy. He had built something that survived him by 200 years. He had taken kingdoms that had stood for generations. He had crossed a river because a woman on the steppe had told him no, and no one had ever told him no before and meant it. He had underestimated one person. Once. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please subscribe and leave a like. You can also write in the comments which historical topics you'd like to see next. See you in the next video.